But anyway, La Chorrera had this very dark history of these rubber atrocities. Well, we rolled in there, and immediately there began the unfolding over just about a 3-week period. I mean, a very short length of time, from the 27th of February 1971 until the 22nd of March. So a period of just under 4 weeks. It was like the doorway was standing open. All rational expectation had to be put behind. It was as though our whole lives had built to this moment, and what we thought was a quest for an obscure orally active tryptamine drug, it turned out it was more as though something which had been with us from the cradle, actually lured us to this extremely remote place where there was no way out, no radio, no communication of any sort, lured us to this place to then begin this series of unfolding ideas. And these ideas that were released in that 3-week period are basically all I've ever worked with. I haven't had an original thought since March of 1971, essentially. It's just been endless recension and reworking of what happened there. Well, what happened was taking a lot of mushrooms and being in this incredibly natural, beautiful, low toxin environment. I mean, there was barely even radio waves in this place. It was so remote. It was like our minds began to dissolve back into the order of nature. And we began to discover what the order of nature actually is. And it took the form of an idea, which my brother Dennis, who's the pharmacologist of the gang, although he wasn't at the time, he has gone on to become the person he most was before he studied the subject. Now he is a molecular biologist, research pharmacologist, and drug designer. Then he was a 21-year-old kid with a rave. But he proposed that there was a way to take these psychedelic drugs and to use sound to cause a small number of these drug molecules to permanently bond into the DNA. The term for this is intercalate. And it's known now, although it wasn't known then, that many drugs do this. Many drugs do intercalate. You all know how DNA is a double helix with nucleotide rungs on the ladder. Well, certain molecules, especially certain drug molecules, can slide right in between the rungs of that ladder, and without imparting any physical deformation to the molecule, they can change its properties. In fact, this may be how psychedelic drugs work. Now, we're at the edge of known physiology and neurophysiology when we talk like this. One of the great puzzles of biology, or human biology, is the persistence of memory. In other words, it's said that every molecule in your body is cycled within a 5-year period. That, 6 years ago, there wasn't a single atom in your body that is now in your body. The form persists, but the matter is traded in and out, except in one case, which is the neurons do not trade out. The neurons that you're born with are the neurons that you die with. So then the problem here is memory. You can be 70 years old and have an absolutely crystal clear memory of your first day of attending school in that red brick schoolhouse 65 years ago. Okay, conservatively, 7 times every molecule in your body has been swapped out. So where has this memory been all this time that you can pull it up with perfect clarity? This is a great mystery of metabolism, unsolved to this day. There are several possibilities. One possibility is that memories are not located in the body at all. Although suggesting this is no magic bullet, it raises a number of questions, probably as difficult to solve as the original question for which this was proposed as a solution. Okay, what are the other possibilities? The memories must be stored then in the non-degrading part of the body. The non-degrading part of the body is the neural DNA. The cell nuclei of neurons don't change within your lifetime. Well, so then you take this idea to an orthodox molecular biologist or neurophysiologist or geneticist, and they say, well, this is just bunk. I mean, in the first place, you don't understand the concept information. The kind of information which is stored in DNA is sequences of nucleotides which code for protein. To confuse that with an image of your great-grandmother's face is to just, have such a mush of categories that it's hopeless to even talk to you. Okay, so that destroyed the supposition, but it didn't solve the problem of memory, yeah.
What about the possibility that what happens when you remember that schoolhouse 65 years ago, that you aren't remembering it, you are remembering the last time you remembered it, that you only actually remembered that schoolhouse once, and then every time after that, all you remember is the last time you remembered it?
But what if you haven't remembered it for 50 years? I mean, this happens.
But I'm suggesting that you're not remembering it each time. You're only remembering a snapshot of it. You remember the last time you remembered it.
But what if that was more than that length of time ago?
Yeah, that doesn't solve this problem of how is the memory trace able to persist. Well, so Dennis's notion was, he said that some form of superconductivity must be involved. Now, this was 1971. Superconductivity was not known to occur more than 0.3 of a degree above zero absolute. He said, no, there must be room temperature superconductivity going on in the DNA. This must be how the DNA preserves information. Now, if you know anything about superconductivity, it is the perfect physical phenomenon to use for preserving information, because no information degrades in a superconducting circuit. Say you have a ring of supercooled gold and you impart an electric current to this ring. That current, barring interruption of the superconducting state, will circle that gold ring with zero resistance for eternity. Now, the only thing which can cause the superconducting phenomenon to cease is if a high-energy source overwhelms the superconductivity, comes in from the outside and disrupts it. Now, think about the problem that nature faces with the genetic machinery. The key to life is error-free copying. Wherever there's error, then there becomes mutation or problem or incompatibility. So all of the strategies of genetic preservation of information seek to maximize the absence of error. So the perfect mechanism for doing this would be a superconducting mechanism. Now you see, the major cause of mutation in the natural environment is cosmic radiation, ambient cosmic rays, high energy particles that smash into the genome, physically collide with the DNA and break the bonds and disrupt the message so that it can't be copied. Superconductivity would be the natural medium to retard this process. So Dennis's notion was that the DNA was a kind of superconducting storage device, and that in fact what we call the Jungian unconscious, or the racial memory, or the genetic memory, could be tapped into, and that what a drug trip is a neurotransmitter that competes with serotonin, that then broadcasts off this genetic memory bank a slightly different slice of the catalog. Serotonin broadcasts are the equivalent of traffic and weather reports, where it tells you how to get around in the world and where not to go and how to avoid problems. If you swap out the serotonin channel for the psilocybin channel, suddenly it's the equivalent of Pacifica Radio. It's running philosophy discussions and classical music from another planet, you see, because the efficiency and the emphasis of these neurotransmitters is different. Well, so we went through a series of startling revelations and experiences using this idea, because he was dead serious about doing this and decided that I would be the likely candidate for what he called hypercarbylation, and that, you know, we would saturate me with drug molecules, and then he knew how to do the thing to make an ordinary trip turn into the forever trip by locking these molecules into their bond sites. Oh, and that's the piece of the puzzle that I didn't explain that you might not realize. When a molecule is superconducting, I'm sorry, when a molecule is at 0 degrees absolute, it becomes superconducting. So if you can cool a molecule to that level, it will immediately bond permanently to whatever is physically nearby. So Dennis said, what you do is you take all these, you saturate your body with these drug molecules, and then using a complex theory of harmonic canceling, which I won't regale you with this evening, he thought there was a way to generate sound that would affect a very small number of these drug molecules and cause them actually to superconductively bond into the DNA. And then the trip would be permanent. The trip would be scripted into the genome, or at least for the life of the organism. And he suggested that if you make the DNA superconducting in this way, that eventually death is no problem. It's just sort of like a shedding. And you go into the rivers and the water and the air, and you become very tiny. You become the size of your DNA nucleus. Well, I thought that this was a very highly unlikely notion. So unlikely that since he was so gung-ho to try it, the best thing to do would be to just let it rip. And if there was something there, that would be interesting, but that I was willing to bet dollars to donuts against it. Well, he set up the experiment, he did the experiment, and he had made very extravagant and inflated predictions about what would happen. He thought that you would literally give birth to your mind as a physical substance. I don't know whether it would flow out of your nose or where it would come from, but he thought that there was a kind of superconducting translinguistic matter, he called it. He thought there was a way to dissolve the boundaries between matter and spirit and create an obsidian fluid that would be obedient to your own imagination, that would in fact be you. You would just preserve your body as a convenient reference point, but you would actually become this stuff.
What were you guys on?
Yeah, really?
I'm telling you. So I thought, sure, so try it. So,
What's to lose?
yeah, what's to lose? We didn't come all this way for nothing. You say you know what you're doing. Nobody else has a clue, so go for it. Well, what happened was not what he predicted, but not nothing. And that was the great puzzlement of this experience, because what happened was immediately after this procedure was carried out, I could tell that something had changed in me. And it was very hard. It took me a few hours to figure out what it was. And what it was it was though a switch had been thrown. And I began to understand. That's all it was. It was, Whitehead defines understanding as the apperception of pattern as such. And suddenly, I began seeing things very differently. I began to see the relationships between things on one level and among levels. And I stopped sleeping. I didn't sleep for 11 days, effortlessly. And every night during this 11 days, in the late evening, I would just become very, very impatient for all these people to go to bed, my companions, because the chatter of the camp would interrupt my thoughts. And what I just wanted to do was I would just go in the jungle and I would just put my hand on a tree and I would just stand and think and think and think and think and think. And it was this endless cascade. It was not like a psychedelic trip. There was no hallucination. There was simply this unfoldment. And it was like as though I was just filled to overflowing with gnosis. I would sit down on this ground and begin thinking, and I would lose myself in my thoughts, and when I would come back to my situation, I would look down in front of myself and see that while I had been thinking, my hands had built a fire out of small sticks. It was as though everything was cognitive activity. Dennis went what would be conventionally called a psychotic episode, but it wasn't a typical psychotic episode. It was a kind of turning inside out, so that he became... He in a single moment after the hypercarbylation, it was like he ended up at the other end of the universe, turned inside out and headed backwards. And over the next 14 days, he came through a progressive narrowing of his what he was identifying with. So that first it was the whole universe, then it was the galaxy, then the solar system, then each of the planets moving in, then all life on Earth, then all mammals, then all human beings, then all Irish, then finally all the Mckennas there ever were, and then finally the question was he him or me? And then he got that sorted out finally, and then he was fine. Shaken, but fine. We've now reached the 22nd of March, 1971, and I was just... I couldn't talk to anybody. I was in a very, 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 very strange place. I mean, things went on... Well, just as an example, because there wasn't much of this 3D stuff that you could wrap your mind around, but everything was teaching me. everything had a message for me. And I would go out into the jungle, and I would raise my arms above my head, and I would call the butterflies into me out of the jungle, and they would come, first by dozens and then by hundreds. And I would stand there, and here's how the thought progression would go. I would call the butterflies in, and then it would move me to tears. And so there I am, standing, covered with butterflies, tears of joy streaming down my face, and streaming down my face, and streaming down my face. And finally I begin thinking, so now what? and then I think, the people back at the camp who doubt me, those bastards, wait till they see this. So then I would go to the camp, and I would be smiling, the tiny smile that only Buddhas can manage, and I would invite them into the jungle to see something unannounced. And so they would say, well, I don't know, you're just, all right, we'll go. So then we would go into the jungle, and I would raise my hands above my head, and I would call the butterflies in, and none would come. And these people would just say, oh, God, it's getting worse and worse and worse. Your brother is nuts. You have delusions of This is pathetic. I mean, this is a mind in wreckage. This is the green hell. This is the thing we feared the most, And so eventually, and any of you who are self-diagnosed as schizophrenic will agree with me on this, I'm sure. The key to surviving schizophrenia in one piece and avoiding massive intervention by the mental health care authorities is shut up. Shut up about it. Do not talk about it. Of course you can raise the dead and heal the sick and divine distant event, but just shut up about it, or you're not going to make it through. Well, eventually everybody else sort of renegotiated themselves back to some kind of reality. My brother flew back to the States, and I was, in a sense, left in the Amazon to mull all this.